Hey, it's Kimike. This video is my review of The Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. This book is made up of 3 short stories made by George R.R. Martin. They were previously already written as a Duncan and Egg series, but they went out of print a while back, so they just redid the whole thing as a new package. Now this review won't have any spoilers, so if you haven't read the book, just keep watching and be fine. Now when I was reading this book, I kind of thought that each short story expanded on a part of the world of Ice and Fire that we didn't really get from the main story. So I'm going to go through each story and the new things it expanded on and how it can help you understand the whole world of Ice and Fire and the different groups in it. Now the first story we have is the Hedge Knight. This story really focused on tournaments, knighthood, status, and the Targaryens of the past. Now there are many tournaments and fights and all these things that we see in Game of Thrones and A Song of Ice and Fire. But in the main series, we don't get a full explanation of how they're run and who can compete in them. Now in this short story, we kind of see who can compete in them, the rules of how it's done, the courtesies behind it, between the lines rules, and all these other things that we didn't know about tournaments previously. We find out the different styles of tournaments and the different occasions that they're appropriate on. For example, in the show, we learn that Dothraki weapons aren't really exciting unless they have 3 deaths. This is the kind of information that I find really interesting, and this book is just full of all these different informations and insights into the world that we didn't really get from the main story. Now another really interesting part about this first story is how it displays how knighthood and statuses among the community are really displayed. We get to see how hedge knights, sellswords, lords, common people, and all these different ranges of positions are seen as part of the community. Now finally, something that I was really looking forward to in this book series was learning about the Targaryens of the past and how they were viewed by the public then. Now from the story we get from the Song of Ice and Fire, we learn about the Mad King, Daenerys, and all these Targaryens that we learn about from just that day and age. We can see that Rhaegar is a noble person, the Mad King is a crazy idiot, Daenerys is a hopeful new leader, and her brother not so much. Now that's all good and well, but the Targaryens when they were on the throne had much more different effect on the realm than the Mad King when he was on the edge of losing his kingdom. So my interpretation of how the people saw the Targaryens back then, they were kind of like separate from the human race, more of an alien species ruling from above. Targaryens weren't really susceptible to the same kind of scrutiny and rules as normal men. Targaryens were dragons, literal dragons among the people, separate and, the reptilian overlords of the land of Westeros. And we get all this from just one short story. Now the second short story in the book is The Sworn Sword. In this, we get to see what a hedge knight, sellsword, or guard would actually do underneath the service of a lord. It also gives us insight into the villagers and the common people, the farmers, the workers, the builders, just the normal average people in Westeros. We get to see how their education has affected their lives. We get to see what they think and how they respond to different things. And we get to see their loyalties and who they truly work for. And that's pretty basic stuff that, we also kind of get to see a little bit of that in the main series, but not really much at all if you just watch the TV show. But what was really cool to see in this book series was the impact of how the nobles' walls affected the entire communities of different lands. Now we hear about these great rebellions and wars, the Robb Stark, the king in the north, Tywin Lannister, his courageous killing of whatever it was. But we don't really get to see what happens to the soldiers, the families, the people left behind, the people who go out, and the result of everything when it's all solved up. Now the lords and kings can hand out all the pardons they want and say the war's over, but it doesn't really change the fact that people fought people. Neighbours fought against neighbours, lords fought against lords, and in the end of the day people died and people survived. The grudges and the lines that were drawn will still stay with the community for a very long time. No one's going to oddly forget that that lord turned against the king and sent his men to go kill my son. Again, that gives that really human feel to the series that George R.R. Martin does so well. It makes it feel like this is a real kingdom with real people, and this could happen in this world that we live in right now. Now we also got to see how small lords acted and how they kind of solved issues amongst themselves. Now, the lords aren't going to call upon the great mighty overlords and wardens and go straight to the king whenever one lord trespasses the land or steals some other guy's crops. So lords must solve these issues amongst themselves by trial by combat, or just normal trials, getting other lords to come in and pitch in, or often or not, sending their soldiers in and killing everyone. In the grand scheme of Westeros, the major lords and the king really don't have much impact on the small things. How many crops are made, how the little lords act, and the small atrocities that happen all throughout the kingdom. Now finally this story kind of wraps up in a way that gives you an understanding of where people were placed in society, and how the limitations of what they can do and the different areas they put in really limit the expansion and the kind of understanding that people can go through. It really shows me how even people who are high up can be kind of pulled back from their full potential and things that they truly want because of their status. Even if they are high up or they're lord or something, they may not always get what they want just simply because the rules in place are so barbarian. Now the last short story in this entire book is The Mystery Knight. Again, in this story, we get a little bit more about tournaments, the life of a Hedge Knight, and the normal stuff you would expect in this story. But the true themes of this story are all about honor and the true greed in people. George R.R. Martin tries to show us that not all people are the good guys or bad guys. Some people can pretend to be gallant knights out in the field, or people that you think you can really trust, but they're just kind of going out on their own purposes, trying to achieve what they can in this small little world. Even though this has a lot more just one point of view from one POV of a character, and he's kind of like more on the good end of things rather than the bad end of things, it does still give a nice contrast to how we have other medias that tell us these good guys as bad guys compared to this more realistic humanized world. Now before we get too philosophical, it does tell you a lot more about the history of the Targaryens and Westeros. Now one thing that's briefly mentioned in the show, and quite a lot talked about in the main series of books, is the Blackfires. Myself, I've always been deeply interested in the Blackfire rebellions and the goings on in these giant civil wars of Targaryens. Now because this is set in the day and age where the Blackfires are alive and kicking, and maybe they've been set back a bit, but they're still sending in people, they're still part of the world, and they still, have a chance of getting that throne at one point. This makes the Blackfires seem a lot more bigger than just something a maester wrote down in a history book. It makes them seem more real and more relevant to the world that we know of Westeros. The conquests of these different Blackfires and the effect they had on the societies will never go away in Westeros for a very long time, and still majorly impact a lot of things happening in the story. Like if you read the main series, there's all these theories about how young Griff is actually a Blackfire, son of Valerio's wife, which was a Targaryen or Blackfire. So we can see that the Blackfires returning and taking the throne and their Targaryen heritage is still very relevant to the story. And that is why this entire book is amazing and really informative, and it gives you a new insight into the mind of George R. R. Martin. I feel like George R. R. Martin is using these characters in this story to relay something that he can't relay in his main story. He wants to give us more background info, he wanted to give us foreshadowing, and he wanted to give us context to what's happening in the world around us right now, if it was Westeros. Because remember, we're not actually living in Westeros. It's a made-up fantasy world inside the crazy man's head, but we all love it. As you can see, I thoroughly enjoyed this book, and I think you guys will as well. So I highly recommend any of you guys who want to read this book to go out to your library or to your bookstore and buy it if you want to. Or I can hook you guys all up with a free audiobook right now, and you don't have to do any of that. If you go to www.audibletrial.com/king, then you guys can get a 30-day free trial of the Audible service. This will give you 1 credit that you can spend to get any audiobook you want for free from their entire website of 15,000 different titles. And currently they do have a Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, so you can get that if you want. All you gotta do is go to www.audibletrial.com/king, then go for the full purchase system, which will come up to a total price of $0, and then you're done. Other than that, I'll see you guys next time.